Hello and welcome to June's AMA. Here are the questions that my patrons asked for this month. If you'd like to ask a question from one of these AMAs, consider supporting me over on my Patreon. There's a link in the description. Moving on to the questions, the first batch comes from Aquasun, first of which being, of all the creative jobs, example, artist, author, director, actor, musician, what do you think is the coolest for someone to have? I'm not personally someone who thinks about cool stuff, or if I do, I kind of think everything is cool, but in different ways. I guess if we're talking about the masses, people rave about actors the most, and then maybe directors. For artists or author or musicians, you have to get pretty big, I'd say, before people give you the time of day, rather than thinking of it more of a hobby. I mean, I guess there are obviously smaller actors and directors, but I don't know, I feel like there's a bit more respect given to those practices as opposed to just hobbies. You know, like I don't ever hear people being like, oh, they act on the side. Unless it's like as a side job, you know what I mean? The next question from Aquasun, how much time do you spend making art per week? My numbers might be a tad off because I haven't been doing comics lately since they've been done for the summer for a while because I made a buffer. But I'd say around 4-ish hours in terms of drawing per week. It's honestly not too much. I do a lot more organizational stuff, and over the years I've learned a lot of shortcuts to make things go faster. Next question, favorite Zero Escape entry? Honestly, I would say the first. I definitely like Virtue's Last Reward quite a bit, but I do think it tries to go a bit too grand with what it's going for, to the point that I kind of fall out of it a tiny bit. It's still enjoyable, but I think 999's smaller and more personal scope really helps it stand out and stand on its own. I like the 2D sprites more than the 3D models as well, and the location of 999 is less mechanical, which I like. Because like Virtue's Last Word has like the, you know, steel warehouse look, which is like oppressive and like ooh, and there are some neat rooms like the garden and stuff. But on the whole, there's just a bit too much of that like steely warehouse that I'm just like, it's neat, but not quite my jam as much as the boat is. Next question. What was the last Western cartoon you watched? That, I guess, maybe clips from the Owl House, but not the show itself. If you mean the last full show I watched as in every episode, probably Gravity Falls. I definitely like Western cartoons, but I haven't been into watching full series of them lately, especially because they do tend to be more episodic, so it's like, I don't know, I don't feel as much, like, I guess, pressure to watch the full thing. Plus, I've been more into watching like gaming content like Let's Plays and streams, so I'm getting my fill of stuff to watch, enough that I don't really feel the need to watch any cartoons. Last question from Aquasun. If you one day woke up with amnesia, what would your amnesiac self think of your room of personal effects? The first thing I notice would probably be how much is cramped into one space. I can still walk and stretch out, but it's a very deliberate area of which I do that in. I'd also probably be like, wow, this bed is super high up off the ground, I have to climb on it, because the new bed frame I got a while back, plus a spring mattress, makes my bed like up to the middle of my torso, so it's like, it is nice though. Overall, I noticed that there's not a lot of cohesion or any theme. Just an eclectic gathering of items that fit needs rather than taste specifically. But I do think it does all come together in some way. If you've ever seen my New Horizons main room of my house, you know what I mean. Okay, next set of questions comes from Hannah Page. First of which being, have you ever felt like you were being watched and were right about it? Nothing like, no specific like story, but yeah, stuff like eating in public, riding the bus, or going to the pool, and looking and seeing as someone who keeps looking at you. then you get stuck in that limbo of wanting to know if they're still looking but not wanting to make eye contact, so you just gotta rely on your peripheral. Which is like, I don't like that. Next question. It's June, the month of marriage. Tell me of your top OTPs. This one is a bit hard because honestly, I don't really ship things. At least not much these days. And I don't really remember much from the olden days. There's one I know for sure, but the others are like wavy hand. The first of which, for sure one, is Keima and Chihiro from The World God Only Knows. Definitely a top OTP. Definitely something I ship. For sure. The ones after this, I'm like, honestly, hilariously, the next closest answer I have might be Keiji Hattori and Akiko Koizumi from Detective Conan and Magic Kaito, which are like sister series, except that barely counts as a ship because it's like a crack ship because of a fic I wrote, and I wasn't even planning on shipping it. It just kind of happened because I was like, wow, their chemistry is actually really great. But in the main series, they've never met. So I'm just like, of all things that I actually have shipped, it's a thing where these characters have not interacted at all. As for the last one, because you asked about top 3, I guess Shulk and Alvis? Maybe? Like, I found them interesting, but like, I don't know, I'm not much of like a shipper. And in terms of ships, most of the time I'm just like, I kind of see anything as interesting, except obviously like the kind of like, that's not really, that's kind of sketchy ships. Or like, if it seems kind of imbalanced, I'm like, not my tea. But yeah, hopefully that's a satisfactory answer. Next question is, do you read many comic books like Marvel or DC? I'm not into Marvel or DC. In terms of non-manga comics, I tend to like newspaper comics instead. Like, I have some Calvin and Hobbes comics, like a big collection book of that too. And if I had more disposable income, I'd actually get more of those. Like a lot of the Calvin and Hobbes especially. Maybe like a Garfield, and maybe some of the like more internet type comics. I like the newspaper-esque, what would you call that, format. And like I do like Western comics as well. Like I have Bounty Light, which is made by a Western creator. Well, I guess more J. Perry. He was from Korea. I guess that would be East. I don't know. It's formatted like a hybrid of Western and manga, I guess I would say. Oh, and then I do have Cucumber Quest as well. I like that one as well. But nothing like the more standard Marvel and DC stuff. I'm not into that type. I personally find it kind of stale, if that makes any sense. At least in like the drawings are beautiful and such, but I don't know. It feels kind of rigid to me. And I'm like, I don't really like that in my comics. Next question is, if you had full control over how Nintendo made its next console, what would you have them do? I'll be honest, I'm not really much of a specs person. As long as the console functions, looks decent, and is a fair price, I kind of don't care. Like, you know, you'll see people be like, oh my god, this runs awfully, or it doesn't look great, and like, I can definitely see what people mean when they're like, oh, this doesn't look as like up to par with other stuff, and I'm like, I get it, but also, unless it's like really bad, like Scarlet and Violet having the entire sunlight glitching out, or like things popping out very obviously, I don't really care too much. Like, I'll be like, oh, that's a shame, but I'll still, as long as it functions and is fun, that's my main concern. And as long as it's not like ugly, like if the color palette is nice enough and I'm like, I can tell that's a tree, I really don't care. I grew up in the polygon era where things were very pointy. You had to kind of imagine a bit of the details, so I guess that might be why. Is that I'm like, as long as I can tell what it is, and I'm having a good time and it functions, and you had like some sort of image for what you want it to look like, eh. And then don't rob me of money. That's the other thing. I guess that's the only thing. But I don't know if this counts in terms of the question, but it's more of a concrete thing. I'd like a Paper Mario game that went back to something closer to the older style of games. Like, I'm glad that people can enjoy the newer ones. Man, I miss it. I'd love just like a thrown bone being like, this is the last one that will be like this, because then it'll be closure. And I could just do it and be like, okay, it's done. There we go. In any case, the last question from Hannah, which I actually have a fairly long answer to, is graphical fidelity in games has been on the rise, and everyone seems to be racing towards realism. What do you think of this trend? I'll be real, I think it's kind of dumb for a number of reasons. Mainly that aiming for realism ultimately hits a logistical growth problem where at the start of 3D development there were huge steps between each generation in quality of the models and textures in search of realistic styles. But as that quality grows, you make less and less progress over time, so you kind of have less returning ends. It's the difference between going from the blocky, pointy polygons of like Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time to smoother edges compared to going from pretty realistic looking guy to pretty realistic looking guy, but you can see gray hairs now. Ooh. Another reason is that I think the hyper focus on realism is often leading further away from other aspects of game design, like the game. It feels like so many games these days, in quotes, are trying less to be games and that they're trying more to be like interactive movies, which like, I get that there's intrigue there, but if you want to make a movie, please go make a movie. Like, if you want it to look super hyper realistic to the point of looking like, oh my god, I can touch that, hire people and make a movie. Or like, okay, I get it. People want to be able to create that and be like, I made that, and that's neat. But I don't know, I'm just like, that feels like a lot of work for little results in my head, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know, I feel like the skew of work to what you're getting in the end, especially because it's so easy to slip into Uncanny Valley, where if something just minute is off, people can feel it, and it feels really weird because of how real it is. You know, like, if you look at Mario, people aren't gonna be like, oh my god, like, look at his proportions, he looks so weird. It's because they know that that's what he's supposed to look like, so they don't care. Another reason is that realism ages far worse than stylistic games. It's been mentioned so much, but for good reason. Wind Waker on the GameCube still holds up fantastically because of its artistic direction. Okami on multiple systems still holds up fantastically because of its artistic direction. The like original, you know, more, I guess, Metal Gear Solids or like Resident Evils, like, they're still playable and such, but like, you can definitely tell that's not real. Even though that's what they were going for. It's like, oh, you know what I mean? If something is trying to look real, but it's slightly off, like I mentioned, it goes into Uncanny Valley, where... Uncanny Valley. Even if you don't know exactly what's off, your brain can still subconsciously know what you're looking at, and that it's not quite human. And that can really make a, like, feeling of distance between the player and the character they're supposed to relate to. Another reason is that pushing 3D modelers to get every follicle, every pore perfect down to the last pixel or texture can often lead to or pile on to a workplace crunch that is way too common in the game industry. I would absolutely rather have a game look worse, quote unquote, than know that someone suffered behind the development of, like, Anthony's mustache. Lastly, and definitely the least important thing, I'm just not a fan of realistic looking games. At least as they're trending right now. I find barely any of them have any style or substance to how they look, instead falling back on just looking capital R real. Which is a shame, because film shows us that realism doesn't mean you can't have style. Kill Bill with the iconic yellow jumpsuit, Nanny McPhee with the super colorful house, you know, Series of Unfortunate Events, the Grinch movie, heck, of like the Dr. Seuss like buildings and stuff. Realism, like looking real, does not mean looking bland. And personally, I find a good chunk of the realistic games look bland. Not all of them. There is definitely ones with like style, like I haven't even played it, but like the BioShock Infinite with like the old-timey buildings plus the like underwater neon lights. That's style, that's great. But so many don't do that, and that's where you get the people being like, everything is brown. Because I don't know, it's just like, oh. But if something has a clear artistic style and vision in mind, even if like maybe the textures aren't the greatest or something, I still massively prefer that, because I can get what they were going for and it can still look unique and have its own flair. Well, with that rant over, the next and last set of questions comes from Gaku. The first of which being, do you have any birthday traditions? Not really. I guess going out to get food to treat myself is probably the biggest one. Next question. What is your favorite flavor of cake? Marble cake is my personal favorite, though coffee cake is also really good. Next question. What was your most memorable birthday gift? One year my dad got me a TV for my room and was also like, look, we got a family van. And I was like, that's a lot of money though. As you can probably tell, I am hard to get gifts for. I just appreciate talking with people or like a single game. You know, like if everybody I knew got me a game, I'd be like, no, that's too much. I'm like, everybody just put together for one game, and then I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Next question. What is the upper limit of candles on a cake before it becomes a fire hazard? That probably depends on the surface area of the cake, because if it's a bigger cake, then it can afford to have more candles on it, but if it's a smaller cake, the same amount of candles can't be on there. More seriously, on a standard size cake, the eyebrow starts raising after 10, getting higher as you get closer to 20, which is definitely too much. That's why they make the number candles after all. The last question from Gaku, and last question for this month, is not birthday related, but what is your favorite anime opening and ending? For opening, my favorite is definitely God Only Knows from The World God Only Knows. 8 minutes of pure bliss for me. As for ending, I think I'll go with Song of Truth from Inuyasha. I love that song a lot, though honestly, it was a hard pick because most of the Inuyasha endings are top-notch. And that is the last question of the month, so I'll head on over to the end screen here. Here you can see my lovely patrons scrolling by, along with their patron NPCs. If you're interested in asking a question or any of the other rewards that come along with supporting me, check out the link to my Patreon in the description. You can also check out some links from my patrons in the description as well. I highly recommend it. They support me, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you to everyone who asked a question and anyone who watched this video. The support really does mean a lot to me. But until next month, we will have to wait for some more questions in the heat of the summer. I always think it's never as bad as it is, and then I try to start drawing, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm sweating storm. But until then, bye!